when asking for hard evidence of a nuclear weapons program. Sections or paragraphs 52 and 53 were cited of the latest IAEA report. But I would suggest to you that these are full of qualified assumptions. Words like possible, indicates, and may are as strong as they go. I mean, there is no hard evidence, I would put to you, of the manufacture of nuclear weapons, nor of a decision to do so. In fact, confirmed by, as you're probably aware, the director of the US National Intelligence Services very recently. And that leads me on to suggest there's nothing in there that indicates a breach of Article 2 of the NPT. The article makes it, that article, as you well know, makes it illegal for any non-nuclear signatory to manufacture nuclear weapons. Would you therefore agree that it is entirely within the bounds of the treaty for a signatory to conduct research into nuclear weapons technology as implied by Article 10 of that treaty?
Well, Iran is in breach of UN Security Council resolutions calling for it to desist from uranium enrichment. And
I accept that's a separate. I accept that, but can I just address the NPT Article 2 issue first? And I think you make a valid point about the resolutions.
Yes.
We'll come on to that.
Our concern, of course, is that Iran may be putting itself in a position where it could make a rapid breakout from the non-proliferation treaty. That is our concern, and that is a deeply alarming prospect. And that is why the UN Security Council has passed the resolutions that it has. That's why the IAEA Board of Governors have adopted resolutions. I think they're now in defiance of, I think from memory, 11 different resolutions of the IAEA Board. And this is part of a wider pattern of behavior in which, as we know, Iran has, whatever our arguments about what the evidence shows, I think it's indisputable that Iran has repeatedly sought to conceal aspects of its nuclear program and is now embarked on the enrichment of uranium to 20% on a scale and in a way that is incompatible with any peaceful use for that enriched uranium that it may have. And so all of these things add up together into an overall picture.
Can I take it, Foreign Secretary, just being specific for a moment, that do you agree or not, just on the narrow point of whether Iran is in contravention of the NPT, particularly as defined by Article 2, that as we stand there is no evidence, concrete evidence, to suggest that is the case? In other words, there is no evidence to suggest that Iran has manufactured a nuclear weapon.
We've never said that Iran has now manufactured a nuclear weapon. Okay. Nobody has, I don't think anybody has asserted that. Different views have been expressed at different times about, sometimes relating to the period before 2003, about research into a nuclear device. But no, we've never asserted that Iran has manufactured a nuclear weapon. We do take the accumulation of factors, some of which I've just been describing, as an indication that that may very well be something that they have in mind, and that we cannot wait. We cannot just do nothing diplomatically or on the sanctions front while awaiting a moment where Iran has put itself in a position for a rapid breakout from the non-proliferation.
Yes, but I think we can accept that research as defined by the NPT is allowable, and that there is, and I think you've said yourself just now, that there's no evidence to suggest they've actually contravened the NPT. But what we are saying is that they've contravened a number of UN resolutions. I mean, what I would suggest to you, Foreign Secretary, is that, and it's a subtle point, but I think it's relevant here, and that is, resolutions are the reflections of political views, biases, and, if you like, fears of Security Council members at any given time. And they can be wrong. There was no shortage of resolutions, for example, leading up to the Iraq War regarding WMD. But I don't think anybody could disagree now that, we did go to war on a false premise. There were no WMD in existence. But can I therefore lead us on to perhaps what is prevalent in a number of people's minds, and that is the concern about a possible military intervention. I'm not suggesting by the UK or the US, but perhaps by Israel. Would you acknowledge that an attack on Iran without authorization from the Security Council would be an act of aggression and breach of the UN Charter?
Well, what action and when is in breach of the UN Charter, I think we would have to define at the time. We have, if it happened, I mentioned in the debate in the House that we have argued to Israel, we've given clear advice to Israel that they should not make, under these circumstances that prevail now, a military strike on Iran. We've expressed that view clearly. Many other nations would have expressed that view.
So you would agree that
Israel as
without authorization from the Security Council, it would be an act of aggression?
Well, I think we'd have to define that. There are, of course, different circumstances of self-defense in which countries can take action. So I'm not going to speculate in advance about the legality or otherwise of action that any nation may take.
No, but without, I mean, there's only two examples, are there not? There's either self-defense, you can obviously act in self-defense, and you can act with authorization from the Security Council. But outside those two examples, any attack on any country is an act of aggression. Would you agree or not?
Well, then you're into the definition of self-defense, of course. And that's why I'm not going to speculate about that. But are we in favour of it? No, we're not. And we've made that view clear to the Israelis, just as I've made that clear in Parliament.
Okay. Can I move on to the existing policy of sanctions and the sabre rattling? I mean, Einstein is said to have remarked that the definition of madness was to keep on doing the same thing whilst expecting different results. I think there is clear evidence that the policy so far, at least, has failed, sabre rattling and sanctions. Sanctions, for example, the Iranians have even moved forward the deadline, the oil embargo deadline, with regards France and the UK. One of our hosts, Mr. Mousafi, an official leader of the Green Movement, said in the 2009 elections, and you'll be fully aware, Foreign Secretary, that the nuclear programme, any compromise on that would be seen as surrender. Do you accept that Iran is not going to move on this issue? It's an instinct of defiance that they have with regards to this issue. It's seen as such paramount importance, and that all sanctions and sabre rattling does is reinforce the pragmatists and people generally in Iran behind the hardliners.
No, I don't accept that argument in general, as is well known from the debate that we had. First of all, I don't accept the description as sabre rattling of this country's policy or the policy of other nations around the world who feel strongly about this. I've been very clear that 100% of our efforts on this are devoted to a peaceful diplomatic solution. And that's certainly not sabre rattling about it. We've warned about the consequences of nuclear proliferation in the Middle East. But we've not been advocating or calling for military action. So I don't accept that definition of it. I do think that the sanctions policy is important, and that agreements such as the one we've made in the European Union to end the purchases of oil from Iran are important and can have an effect in giving leverage on this. You say that Mr. Barron says that they've moved forward the ending of, but the purchases by France and the United Kingdom of Iranian oil were already absolutely minimal. It has no impact at all on this country.
Can I just ask, Foreign Secretary, just moving us on from this then, do you accept that opportunities have been missed on both sides in order to better relations between the two countries? I'm thinking particularly in the early, after 9/11, when Iran showed solidarity with the US, in the early stages of the Afghan war, and the reward from our point of view was to label them as part of the axis of evil, which led directly to the replacement of the reformist and moderate President Khatami. One accepts they were wrong to rebuff President Obama, and one isn't being an apologist for Iran. One doesn't agree with their state-sponsored terrorism, one doesn't agree with their human rights and all that. But would you accept, as former foreign secretaries have, that there have been opportunities missed on both sides to better relations?
Well, to a limited extent on the, if you like, the Western side of this. I don't think opportunities were missed by the United Kingdom on this. I paid tribute in the debate that we had a couple of weeks ago, as I've done before, to my predecessor, Jack Straw, who made, I think, 5 separate visits to Tehran, and who really made an extraordinary effort to arrive at a rapprochement with Iran. Now, of course, one can argue that one can question, did he have the necessary support at the time from the United States and other countries? Perhaps not. So to that extent, one can say that opportunities might have been missed, but not by the British government or the previous British government. And in recent times, as you point out yourself, the speech in which President Obama set out the opportunity for a better relationship with Iran has met nothing other than a rebuff from Iran. I do want to make this point that on the 14th of February, we received the reply, Baroness Ashton received the reply of the Iranian negotiator, Mr. Jalili, to the offer of renewed negotiations. And as I'm sure you will have heard, in recent days, the E3+3, of whom we are one, have agreed that there will be negotiations. The date and venue of those negotiations is now being decided. But this is a fresh opportunity for Iran to come to such negotiations we hope in a different spirit from previous negotiations, without such preconditions at the beginning of those negotiations that all negotiation is meaningless. We will be approaching it in a spirit of trying to reach an agreement, of course, of always maintaining our offer to be of positive assistance to Iran with civil nuclear power if they can clearly demonstrate to us and the rest of the world that their nuclear program is for peaceful purposes. And I do think that the imposition of additional sanctions and the strong words that many of us have used around the world on this issue may have contributed to Iran coming back to the negotiating table. There could be an argument about that, but it has not prevented the opportunity of negotiations being resumed. And without that sanctions policy, the likelihood of Israeli military action that we discussed earlier would be greater, not smaller.
Question each. Frank. Mike, Dave, on Iran.
On Iran, Foreign Secretary, you told me in the floor of the House that you spoke to the Iranian Foreign Minister twice during the time of the embassy siege. Have you been approached since then to have a meeting with him, or have you approached him to have a meeting? And if not, would you welcome if Salih did make contact to actually have a meeting with you?
We haven't discussed having a meeting or had a meeting since then. Now, I don't in any way rule that out in the future, but you'll understand that our concentration is on these negotiations with the E3+3 being resumed. It's very important for those to go through that channel. Baroness Ashton is the representative of those 6 nations. And I don't want to see a lot of side negotiations going on. And that's why we've not been looking at a meeting in current circumstances. Of course, if those negotiations show anything like a promising start, then it will be easier to have other meetings with the Iranians. So I don't rule that out. We haven't broken diplomatic relations, even though both embassies are closed. Not discussed a meeting since the closure of the embassies, nor have we had such a meeting.
Okay.
Foreign Secretary, President Obama just made a very important speech to the American-Israel Political Action Committee, in which, and if you look at it very closely, he makes very firm statements against Iran having a nuclear weapon, but he doesn't use the language which the Israeli government are using, which is about capability. And I would be grateful if you could tell us how closely are we working with the US, and was there anything in President Obama's speech that came as a surprise to the Foreign Office, or were you aware that this was a position which would be put, and do we agree with that?
We work very closely with the United States on this, as you can imagine, and with France as well. And of course, on this subject, more closely with, and with Germany, more closely with China and Russia than we've so far managed to do successfully on Syria, which you may want to come on to. So very, very closely with the United States. And I feel the bulk of President Obama's speech made exactly the same argument that we've been making here in this country. Clearly not in favour of military action under current circumstances, very much in favour of intensifying sanctions and giving negotiations, now they're giving the push for negotiations to be able to succeed. I think we are perfectly content with the President's speech and in agreement with that argument that he was making. None of that came as a surprise to the United Kingdom. The Prime Minister and President Obama will be able to discuss this subject in some detail during the Prime Minister's visit to the United States next week. So we'll continue to work closely with the Americans. That doesn't mean, of course, that the American position about what may happen in the future is exactly the same as ours, but we will continue to work closely with them on it.
The Americans seem to indicate that they very much, in line with what you just said, is that they much preferred sanctions and political pressure at this stage, but they remain of the position that it would be unacceptable for Iran to actually develop nuclear capacity, and if that did happen and it got close, there would be a cut-off point where military action was taken. Is there a cut-off point for the British government, and would they, if the Americans and other leaders took the view that the nuclear capacity was being built up and was then of danger to the region, to the rest of the world, would they then take part in military action to stop Iran getting its nuclear capacity?
Well, this is a question for the future, really. Our position and the American position is that options are not taken off the table. That was not a position that Mr. Barron agrees with, but the House of Commons endorsed that position by a very hefty majority a few weeks ago. That's the American position too, and so nevertheless, it's very true that, as I said earlier, that 100% of our efforts are devoted to a peaceful diplomatic solution. I'm not therefore going to speculate about why or under what circumstances or when we would at any point shift from that policy. We want this to succeed.
So I said we wouldn't rule out direct military action or supporting military action under some circumstances.
Well, it's our position that options are not taken off the table, but I don't think it's necessary or desirable to go into more detail than that.
Move on to Syria now, Foreign Secretary.